The spaceport of Novaria was a tapestry of frantic energy and solemn routine, its endless docking bays brimming with starbound travelers. Hulls of gleaming ships reflected the neon haze of overhead signs, while mechanical loaders rumbled about like dutiful beasts of burden. A cacophony of voices, languages both human and alien, filled the air, mingling with the hum of engines spooling up for liftoff. Traders barked out special discounts on genuine cosmic relics, while Starliner attendants ushered lines of weary passengers toward departure gates. Amid the crowds, a single human sat hunched on a metal bench near Hangar 23, looking out at the swirling chaos. Adrian Vale, ex-soldier of the Frontier Wars, wore the weight of too many battles in the set of his broad shoulders. A black jacket, tattered at the cuffs, hung over a frame once taught with military discipline. A faint scar curved across his left cheek, an unwanted reminder of a skirmish on a frozen moon, years past. He had come to Novaria for work, odd jobs, really. Drifting between postings, he was a man of few illusions. If no one else will volunteer, hire Adrian Vale, the job boards read. He was known to be discreet, skilled. He rarely asked questions. It was not that he lacked compassion, but he had grown wary of illusions of heroism. The wars had taught him that victory and defeat sometimes looked the same in the cold light of day. Folding an old data sheet in his hands, Adrian rechecked the small listing for a security escort gig. The pay was meager, the risk modest. He needed the credits to keep his battered starship, the Sidereal Hawk, fueled and flight-worthy. That battered vessel was the only home he truly had. Just as he stood, ready to make his way to the small kiosk that had posted the job, something cut through the discordant noise, a piercing cry. A child's voice, laced with desperation. "My mother won't wake up. Please, somebody help." It was a voice so plaintive, so raw, that it froze him in place. He pivoted, scanning the sea of travelers. On the ground, not 15 paces away, knelt a young girl with pale, shimmering skin. Her eyes, brilliant silver discs in a slender face, were wide with panic. Her clothes, crafted of a silky, translucent fabric, suggested off-world origins. Next to her lay a prone figure, a woman with the same bioluminescent complexion, motionless, her faint glow flickering like a dying star. A small knot of bystanders had gathered, but none seemed willing to intervene. Some watched with morbid curiosity, others averted their eyes. Adrian sensed that old, familiar pang inside, a refusal to ignore a cry for help, no matter how inconvenient. He stepped forward and knelt beside them. "Let me see," he said gently, placing 2 fingers on the woman's throat to check for a pulse. There was one, weak and thready. The young girl, tears streaming down her luminescent cheeks, looked up at him. "She's been like this for hours. She just collapsed. Please, can you help her?" Adrian nodded without hesitation. "I'll do what I can." His heart hammered. He was no medic, but basic field training had taught him enough to keep people alive until help arrived. Yet around him, nobody else rushed forward, an indifference that gnawed at him. What has become of basic decency? He wondered. But he had no time for moral outrage. He had to act. Carefully, he scooped the unconscious woman into his arms. Her skin was warmer than he had expected, faintly glowing with a bluish radiance that pulsed in time with her shallow breaths. The child, her eyes brimming with fearful hope, clutched at Adrian's sleeve. "That's all right," he murmured. "We'll find a safe place to get her some help." To his left, an automated security drone hovered close, scanning them with mechanical indifference. Adrian cast a cold glance at the device. He wasn't sure how the authorities would react to an alien woman suddenly collapsing in the middle of Novaria's busiest concourse. But that was a secondary concern. She needed a physician now. With the child at his heels, Adrian navigated the corridors toward an emergency medical bay. The crowd parted for him, though few offered assistance. He wondered if the woman was some sort of outcast, or if the port's inhabitants had grown so callous that a stranger's distress held no sway over them. The child, who introduced herself as Elara, never let go of his sleeve the entire way. Emergency triage in Novaria's public medbay was a cramped, fluorescent-lit purgatory where staffers hurried from patient to patient with robotic efficiency. The moment Adrian carried the unconscious woman across the threshold, a stony-faced attendant directed him to a battered gurney. She collapsed. Adrian reported to the med tech on duty. Her breathing is shallow, pulse is weak. The med tech, a young man with half-lidded eyes betraying too many sleepless shifts, nodded and initiated a scan with a handheld device. The woman's luminous skin flickered under the machine's light. The readout glowed in multiple colors, displaying a chaotic cluster of vital signs Adrian could barely interpret. Nearby, Elara clung to Adrian's side, trembling. Her hands, small and luminescent, twisted the hem of her simple robe. "Mama," she whispered, voice cracking with both sorrow and fear. The medtech frowned as he read the results. "Her physiology is quite different," he said. "Zari, from the planet Celax's 9, I believe." With a wave of his free hand, he summoned a frazzled nurse who rushed over carrying a tray of specialized probes. "Her body temperature is dropping," the nurse said quietly. Adrian recognized the word Zari. It referred to a species whose skin was naturally bioluminescent, rumored to have a deep connection to psionic energy. They were rare sightings on Noveria. He had only encountered a Zari once, during a mission in the Outer Rim. That individual's skin glowed like living starlight. Their presence had been mesmerizing and had made them a target. Minutes passed in tense silence as the staff administered intravenous nutrients and gently attached a respiration collar around the woman's slender neck. Elara watched their every move, eyes flicking between her mother's face and the medtech's gloved hands. "Her name is Selene," Elara said at last, as though repeating an incantation might anchor her mother to life. "She was so tired lately. She said she had to find someone, that she needed help too." Elara's words were cut short by a hiss of escaping air from the respiration collar. The nurse frowned and adjusted a dial. The woman, Selene, stirred fractionally, eyelids fluttering before slipping back into unconsciousness. Yet her breathing steadied ever so slightly. Adrian's chest loosened a fraction. "At least she's stable," he thought. He placed a hand on Elara's small shoulder. "They're doing all they can, kid." She looked up, tears glistening in her luminous eyes. "Thank you." Everyone else just looked away. I thought no one would help." Adrian felt a surge of protective anger at the memory of the indifferent crowd. "Well," he managed, "someone had to step up." Just then, the medtech's scanner beeped loudly. He raised an eyebrow at the data scrolling across the screen. "This is unusual. She seems to have a suppressed neural signature. Could be the result of psionic trauma." He glanced at Adrian uncertainly. "We'll do our best, but I've never handled a Zari patient with these symptoms. The sedation might last longer than normal." "What caused it?" Adrian asked. The medtech shrugged wearily. "Could be stress, or a reaction to an invasive procedure. Possibly even poisoning. I can't be sure without a deeper diagnostic, and that costs more than a publicly funded clinic can afford." He fixed Adrian with a pointed look, as if to say, "If you have the credits, we can do more." Adrian's hand curled into a fist, recalling the pittance he had left in his account. He had no illusions about paying for specialized alien treatment. And yet the spark in Elara's eyes compelled him not to walk away. "Just keep her stable," he said. They ushered Selene into a small side ward. A half-drawn privacy curtain offered a flimsy separation from the next bed over, where a robotic limb was being reattached to a groaning minor. Adrian guided Elara to a plastic chair by her mother's side. He tried to ignore the pungent antiseptic smell that clogged the air. He was just about to suggest fetching some water or a bite to eat when a shrill alarm blared from somewhere down the corridor. The med tech stiffened, exchanging panicked glances with the nurse. "What's that?" Adrian asked, though he had a sinking feeling he knew. "Security breach," the med tech replied tersely. "We'd best lock down. You, stay with the patient." Adrian didn't argue, but his instincts kicked into high gear. Reaching inside his jacket, he felt the cold comfort of his sidearm. He had no desire for a fight, yet the alarm told him trouble was already at hand. Beside him, Elara jumped at the klaxon's piercing tone, eyes wide. "What's going on?" Adrian set his jaw. "Not sure, but we'll protect your mother." And so, unbeknownst to him, an unexpected alliance was about to be forged. In that med bay, with an alien mother fighting for her life, a young girl trembling in fear, and an ex-soldier who only wanted to keep his head down, fate was weaving threads that neither of them could see. The security breach was no accident. Two men in dark uniforms barged through the medbay doors, scanning the rows of patients. Their attire bore no official insignia, yet Adrian's combat-trained eyes picked out the subtle outlines of concealed weapons. Mercenaries, more than likely, on a private contract. They were searching for someone. Adrian's gut twisted. He'd been on both sides of hunts like this. Sometimes the hunter, sometimes the hunted. The pair advanced with swift confidence, ignoring staff protests. Then one of them pointed to the side ward where Selene lay. The other nodded. Elara, seeing them approach, scrambled to her feet. "No," she gasped, voice quivering. The mercenaries parted the privacy curtain with a sweep of an arm. The first man's face was etched with cold purpose. The second wore an expression of bored cruelty. Adrian stepped in front of Elara and Selene, hand hovering near the holster beneath his jacket. "Take a step back," the first mercenary barked, voice muffled by the respirator mask strapped around his neck. "We're here for the woman." Adrian kept his gaze level. "She's unconscious and under care. She's not going anywhere." "Out of the way," snarled the second. "Orders say she's to be brought in, alive if possible. But the bounty doesn't specify her condition too finely." His eyes flicked to Elara. "We can grab the kid, too, if we must. Don't push this, soldier." The mention of a bounty snapped everything into dreadful clarity. Selene was worth something, to the wrong people. Adrian's mind raced. He had no loyalty to these mercenaries, nor any official reason to hand Selene over. And yet, interfering with armed men on a mission put a target on his back. But then he glanced at Elara, her terrified face. Saw the faint flicker of Selene's shimmering skin on the gurney, so helpless. No one else is stepping up, he reminded himself grimly. "If not me, then who? Whatever your orders, you'll have to get through me first," Adrian said quietly. A harsh laugh escaped the first mercenary. "Who do you think you are, hero?" Without waiting for an answer, the second mercenary lunged, going for a stun baton at his waist. Adrian's reflexes fired. He deflected the man's wrist, pivoting to grab him by the elbow and hurl him against the adjacent bed. The mercenary slammed against the metal frame with a metallic crash, spattering the floor with equipment. The first mercenary drew a pistol. Adrian wrenched the stasis tray off a nearby counter, thrusting it forward as a makeshift shield. A bolt of green plasma sizzled against the tray's reflective surface, deflecting dangerously close to the nurse's station. Cries of alarm echoed in the ward. Patients cowered as the confrontation escalated. "Hold your fire," Adrian roared, hoping to avoid more casualties. He shot a quick glance at Elara and gestured for her to get down. With a trembling nod, the girl crouched by her mother's bed, fear shining in her eyes. The second mercenary, recovering from the blow, rolled off the bed and aimed a small dart pistol directly at Selene. Adrian cursed. "They're here to kill her if she won't come quietly." He needed to neutralize them fast. He pivoted, letting the stasis tray drop, and fired a single shot from his own sidearm. The pulse of energy caught the second mercenary's pistol at the barrel, sending sparks flying. The man yelped, staggering back. But he wasn't down. The first mercenary took the opening, leveling his weapon at Adrian's chest. A single, sizzling bolt left the muzzle. Adrian just managed to sidestep, the shot grazing his jacket. The smell of scorched fabric and singed hair flooded his senses. Chaos exploded further as the medbay staff scattered, toppling equipment. More security drones floated in, pinging warnings to cease hostilities. But the drones were likely under the control of station security protocols, which might be compromised or at least slow to intervene. Adrian whipped an elbow into the first mercenary's gut, hooking the man's forearm with his free hand to keep the gun pointed away from the child. A brief, savage struggle ensued, and Adrian managed to slam the pistol out of the mercenary's grasp. It clattered across the floor. "That was your last warning," Adrian growled, pressing the muzzle of his sidearm against the man's chest. Behind them, the second mercenary cursed, retrieving a backup weapon from his boot. Adrian didn't hesitate. He pivoted, fired once, and the man dropped, howling in pain as an energy blast singed his thigh. The acrid stench of burned flesh filled the ward. "Stand down," Adrian ordered, heart pounding. The standing mercenary froze, eyeing his fallen partner. Then, with a furious snarl, he swung a desperate punch at Adrian. Adrian ducked, delivering a punishing blow to the man's jaw. He collapsed in a heap. For a moment, the only sound was Adrian's ragged breathing. The nurse, trembling behind an overturned cart, peeked out. Alarms still blared in the corridor, and overhead lights flashed a warning red. Adrian knew more trouble would soon arrive, perhaps in the form of heavier armed backup. He spun to Elara. "We have to move," he said firmly. The child nodded, voice shaking. "What about my mother? We can't leave her." Adrian glanced at Selene, still hooked up to the respiration collar, unconscious. If he left her, the mercenaries would return to finish the job. If he tried to carry her out, it might kill her. But staying here was certain danger. "Help me unhook her," he instructed Elara. She stared at the tangle of wires and tubes, panic blazing in her eyes. "But the machines, she needs them. She'll be worse off if those men come back," Adrian said, voice tight but not unkind. He grabbed the nurse. "Tell me what's essential to keep her alive," he demanded, "and how to remove the rest." The nurse, wide-eyed, pointed to 2 tubes. "This one keeps her hydrated, and that one is delivering a mild sedative. If you remove the sedation line, she might regain consciousness, possibly dangerously. But she's stable enough, or was stable enough, that it won't kill her if you detach it. Here." Working swiftly under the nurse's guidance, Adrian carefully removed the sedation line and replaced it with a portable nutrient drip. He then detached the respiration collar, switching it to an emergency portable unit. Selene's eyelids fluttered, and a faint groan escaped her lips. "Hang on," Adrian murmured, lifting her gently. He felt her fragility as though her bones were made of glass. Elara clutched Selene's limp hand, guiding Adrian's steps through the corridor. They emerged into a hallway clogged with terrified patients and staff. A patrolling security guard, an older man in a wrinkled uniform, spot-checked them suspiciously, but the wailing klaxons and urgent calls for backup kept him from intervening. Adrian's soldier instincts flared. He had only moments to escape the med bay before a full lockdown. "Adrian Vale, don't let them leave," someone shouted from behind. He had no time to see who it was. It sounded like an officer, or perhaps a staff member who recognized his involvement in the scuffle. Elara's breath came in gasps as she trotted beside Adrian, her eyes streaming tears of confusion. Selene's limp form glimmered faintly, her bioluminescent skin reacting to unknown stimuli. At any moment, Adrian expected to feel the bite of a stun bolt in his back. But luck, or fate, was on their side. They ducked into a side corridor leading to an emergency exit. An alarm door labeled "Authorized Personnel" only stood ajar. "Keep close," Adrian hissed. They fled, unseen, into the labyrinth beyond. The corridor they entered was dimly lit, punctuated by hissing vents expelling recycled station air. The polished floors gave way to rougher metal grates, suggesting they were now in a less traveled section of Novaria's underbelly. The station itself was a sprawl of connected segments, each with its own function: stores, living quarters, mechanical, and cargo bays. Adrian guessed they were near the cargo sectors, where contraband deals and clandestine operations frequently took place. It smelled of rust and stale coolant, a far cry from the sanitized medbay. Selene stirred in Adrian's arms, letting out a weak moan. He placed her carefully against a wall, still ensuring she was propped upright and connected to the portable nutrient drip. Elara hovered over her mother, gently stroking her cheeks. "Mama, please wake up," she pleaded. A wave of luminous tears threatened to spill from the girl's eyes. "We need you." Adrian crouched beside them. "She's still breathing, kid," he said, hoping to calm her. "Let's give her a moment." A flickering overhead light cast eerie shadows as Selene's eyelids fluttered open. The glow along her temples flickered, as though a current of energy ran beneath her skin. For a long moment, she seemed disoriented, uncertain of where she was. Then, as she focused on Elara's face, recognition dawned. "Elara, my star," Selene whispered, her voice trembling with relief and fatigue. She reached a trembling hand to brush her daughter's hair. "You're safe." Elara choked back a sob of joy. "Mama, I was so scared." "You wouldn't wake up, and no one would help until Adrian came." Selene's eyes flicked to Adrian, and though they were clouded by exhaustion, he sensed a gratitude there. "Thank you," she whispered. A spasm of pain twisted her features, and she clutched her side. Adrian checked her vitals again. She was still weak, and clearly traumatized. "We need to get off this station," he said, scanning the corridor for signs of pursuit. "Those men are after you. Care to tell me why?" Selene's gaze flickered with alarm, then resignation. She let out a shuddering breath, as though part of her had wanted to keep secrets locked away. Because of what I carry, she said softly. Elara glanced between them, her small face tense. They were chasing Mama even before we came to Noveria. Something about stolen data? I don't know all of it. Selene nodded slowly, though each motion seemed to sap her energy. I was part of a medical experiment, she managed. Not of my own free will. The people who took me, they wanted to harness Zari physiology to create advanced bioweapons. Our abilities, she trailed off, pressing a hand to her temple. Her fingers glowed faintly, matching the pulses of light beneath her skin. Adrian exhaled, anger flaring. He had heard rumors of corporations and clandestine labs seeking to weaponize psionic species. You escaped, he guessed. Selene's eyes closed briefly. Yes. I managed to flee. But I also stole the research data, plans, experiment logs, locations of hidden labs, everything they needed to replicate or continue their work. I intended to expose them, to stop the research from harming others, but I've been on the run ever since. Elara took her mother's hand. She had nightmares. She said we had to find someone trustworthy, someone who could keep us safe while she got this data to the right people. Adrian's heart twisted. He understood the weight of secrets, the moral impetus to bring wrongdoing to light. He also understood the terrible cost of stepping between powerful entities and their illicit goals. So those mercenaries were hired to retrieve or silence you, he said grimly. Selene nodded. And they won't stop until they have the data. She looked up at him, expression fraught with desperation and hope in equal measure. I can't let them continue those experiments. What they did to me, to my people. I'd rather die than see them succeed. Adrian felt the gravity of her words settle in the pit of his stomach. He glanced down at Elara, who gazed at him with unwavering trust. I never asked for this, he thought. He was an ex-soldier looking for a simple paycheck, not a crusade. And yet, here he was, implicated in the greatest moral conflict he'd faced since the war. You said you needed to find someone trustworthy, he said softly, standing. You found me. Let's get off this station before more mercenaries show up. Selene's eyes widened with relief, but also caution. You would do that? Is there a reason not to? Adrian asked, forcing a wry smile. I already shot 2 men today. Might as well finish what I started. Elara's face lit up with gratitude. Selene pressed her lips together, tears glistening. Thank you, she whispered, the words barely audible. Thank you. A sudden pounding of footsteps behind them yanked Adrian from the moment. Station security was closing in. We need to move, he repeated. Bending down, he helped Selene to her feet, supporting her weight over one shoulder. Somewhere down the corridor, a loudspeaker crackled. Section 7 lockdown in progress. All unauthorized personnel are to be detained. Adrian cursed. They're locking down the station. He thought of his starship, the Sidereal Hawk, docked in Hangar 23. If they reached the ship, they could break free. But would station control even allow him to depart after this fiasco? He felt Selene trembling against him. She could scarcely walk, but her eyes burned with determination. This way, he urged, guiding them through a maze of metal gangways and cargo crates. Every clang of their footsteps echoed in the hollow belly of Noveria's less frequented corridors. They turned a corner, only to find 2 station security officers in riot gear blocking the route. Halt, shouted one, leveling a baton. You're... Adrian didn't wait for them to finish. He fired a non-lethal stun bolt that crackled across their visors, momentarily dazing them. Elara yelped as he pulled her and Selene into a side corridor, slipping past the stunned guards. Lights continued to flash. The tension was suffocating. At one point, a group of dockworkers saw them and ducked behind crates, unwilling to involve themselves. The entire station seemed on the brink of panic. After a grueling trek, they reached a wide cargo passage that led directly to Hangar 23. A battered sign above the sliding doors read, Authorized crew only. Adrian took a deep breath. Almost there. But just as he approached the hangar doors, a slender figure with braided hair stepped out from behind a console, someone Adrian recognized. Charlayton, a freelance pilot turned information broker. She had a wicked scar over one eyebrow and a cunning glint in her eye. You sure know how to make an entrance, Vale, she drawled, arms crossed. Whole stations buzzing about a firefight in the med bay, 2 mercs down, the district in partial lockdown. And here I find you on the run with a half-dead Zari and a kid. Adrian's jaw tightened. I don't have time for your games, Char. Let us through. Char snorted. That depends on what's in it for me. Elara clutched her mother's sleeve. Selene's eyes narrowed, a faint luminescent ripple betraying her anxiety. Adrian wanted nothing more than to blow past Char, but the woman had an annoying way of weaving herself into dire situations, Look, Shar, he said through gritted teeth, I owe you for that time on Aurelian Station. Call it even if you let us pass without a fuss. Shar tapped her chin in mock contemplation. Huh, that old debt. Good times. But see, my contacts have been whispering about a Zari fugitive with valuable data. Seems to me that data might fetch a nice price. Or maybe I should just let you go, as you say, and risk losing out. Selene's fists clenched. Elara let out a frightened gasp, burying her face against her mother's shoulder. Adrian's hand tightened around his pistol. You're testing my patience, Shar. She chuckled, a low, mirthless sound. Relax, Vale. I'm no fool. If I wanted to turn you in, I'd have done it the moment you showed up. But I might want a favor in return. Let's call it a down payment on not broadcasting your location. Adrian glared. Name it. Shar smirked. I'll collect when the time's right. Now, go. But be warned, the hangar is swarming with station security. Don't say I didn't do you a favor. He gave her a curt nod. We're done here. She stepped aside, tapping something on her wrist device. The door hissed open, revealing the massive hangar beyond. An alarm klaxon echoed off the dome, while workers and security officers ran to and fro. Adrian didn't wait to exchange any more words. He guided Selene and Elara through the threshold and into the fray, leaving Shar Layton to fade back into the shadows. Hangar 23 sprawled before them like a cavern of steel and neon. Rows of ships, each tethered to its docking clamp, formed a metallic forest. Overhead, mechanical arms and scaffolding wove a lattice of maintenance platforms. The stench of engine grease and burning plasma lingered in the air. Adrian's starship, the Sidereal Hawk, perched at the far end, a patchwork vessel with a scuffed hull and mismatched plating, the product of too many hasty repairs. Station security milled about the area. Some were barricading the main exit from the hangar, others scanning ship's manifests. The klaxon's wail made it hard to think straight. Selene's weight on Adrian's shoulder grew heavier with each step. Her breathing was ragged, though her luminescence pulsed faintly, suggesting she was fighting to remain conscious. Elara held her mother's free hand, brown it with worry. But to her credit, she kept pace, her slender frame taut with determination. We'll board the Hawk, then figure out how to slip past the station's lockdown, Adrian said over his shoulder, scanning for the least guarded route. His mind whirred with the possibilities, a bribe at the control tower, forging clearance codes, or perhaps a stealthy slip through the outer docking ring. Up ahead, 2 security officers spotted them, raising weapons. Adrian halted, hand drifting to his pistol. But just before a firefight could erupt, a side door slammed open behind the guards. A frantic docking supervisor burst out, yelling something about a pressurized leak. Distracted, the guards wheeled away to investigate. That's our chance, Adrian hissed, and hurried forward. He keyed in his access code at the Sidereal Hawk's loading ramp. The hull let out a grinding whir as it lowered. All aboard. Watch your step. Elara practically sprinted up the ramp. Adrian helped Selene ascend, her trembling steps echoing against the ramp's metal surface. The interior of the Hawk was cramped and utilitarian, open storage crates, half-finished modifications, cables snaking across the floor. It wasn't pretty, but it was a home of sorts. Adrian hastily sealed the hatch behind them. Take her to the crew bunk, he instructed Elara. I'll prep for immediate departure. Elara nodded, guiding her mother into the small cabin, where a single bunk was bolted to the wall. Selene collapsed onto it, her eyes rolling back in exhaustion. Adrian watched them for a moment, guilt gnawing at him. She's been through hell. He resolved to do whatever it took to keep them safe. Shaking off his doubts, he headed to the cockpit. The main console lit up at his touch, displays flickering. Come on, baby, he murmured to the ship. Don't fail me now. Outside, the hangar's loudspeaker boomed. Unscheduled departures are prohibited. All vessels stand by for inspection. Failure to comply will result in lethal force authorization. Adrian's blood ran cold, but he kept toggling switches, preparing to launch. We'll just have to run the blockade. The Hawk might have enough speed to outrun the station's defense turrets at close range, if the engines didn't sputter. He keyed the internal comm, Elara, strap in. Gonna be a rough ride. In the bunk room, Elara's voice was soft but steady. Okay. Through the cockpit's forward viewport, Adrian saw a line of station security troops forming along the exit. They had erected energy barriers and were aiming pulse rifles at any ship that dared move. The docking clamps that held the Hawk in place glowed with the red light of a lockdown. Time for some improvisation. Adrian's fingers flew over the controls. He tapped into a rarely used subroutine, one that triggered the emergency override for firefighting. The hawk belched a plume of white chemical foam across the docking clamps. The sudden burst of foam triggered the station's automated hazard response, forcibly releasing the clamps to allow emergency departure. "Sorry, folks," Adrian muttered with grim satisfaction. "There's a new emergency in town." Metal groaned and parted. The hawk shuddered as its landing gears lifted off the deck. Adrian nudged the throttle. The vessel rose in a swirl of displaced air, sending cargo crates tumbling across the hangar floor. A volley of stun bolts and low-yield plasma blasts hammered against the hawk's shields. The energy distribution panel flickered, but the shields held for the moment. Then a new, more ominous tone sounded on the console, targeting sensors from the station's orbital defense ring. "Come on," Adrian hissed. He angled the thrusters, racing for the hangar doors. The overhead barrier was sealed, a large metal gate meant to contain atmosphere. Adrian tapped a few keys, forging an override code borrowed from an old friend's infiltration software. The gate creaked, as though uncertain whether to obey. One more fierce jolt from the Hawk's engines. The ship surged upward, slamming into the half-raised barrier. Metal screeched. For an instant, Adrian feared they would ricochet back into the hangar. Then the gate gave way, buckling open, and the vacuum of space yawned beyond. Station sirens shrieked in protest as the Hawk soared free of Novaria's docking ring. A swirl of starlight filled the viewport, the endless cosmos beckoning. Adrian's heart pounded, but he couldn't celebrate yet. The station's defense ring had locked on. Automated turrets pivoted, spitting lines of green-hot plasma across the void. Adrian juked hard to port, the ship's thrusters screaming under the strain. Several blasts ripped past the hull, scorching the black. Sweat trickled down his brow. He spun the Hawk in a dizzying roll, evading another volley. Finally, the thrusters roared at full capacity, propelling them out of range. The turrets, designed to protect the station from large-scale threats, struggled to track a small, darting craft. Within minutes, the ship soared into open space, far beyond the immediate threat. In the cockpit, warning lights flared, indicating mild damage to the outer hull, but the hull remained intact. Adrian let out a shaky sigh. They were lucky to be alive. He flicked on the autopilot to hold their course, then tapped the internal comm again. "We made it. Sit tight, both of you." Elara's shaky voice responded. "Thank you, Adrian." He leaned back, staring at the stars. They were safe for now. But he knew mercenaries and corporate agents wouldn't stop. "I've just burned all my bridges at Novaria for them," he thought grimly. "I hope it's worth it." Yet, in his heart, he couldn't regret the decision. Something deep within him stirred at the idea of thwarting an evil that preyed upon innocent lives. Selene and Elara were more than fugitives. They were victims of a monstrous plan. And he, for better or worse, had just joined their fight. Once they cleared Novaria's sensor range, Adrian set a course for a remote sector known as the Delphish Drift, a cluster of dense asteroids that provided cover for ships seeking to evade pursuit. The drift's swirling mineral clouds also made scans difficult, which could buy them time to regroup. In the cramped cabin, he found Selene conscious, her gaze distant, and Elara napping fitfully beside her. The child's head rested on her mother's lap, small hands curled as if grasping at fleeting safety. "How are you holding up?" Adrian asked softly, hovering in the doorway. Selene, her cheeks still pale, managed a faint smile. "Better than before, though I owe that to you." She looked down at her daughter, stroking Elara's hair. "I am indebted more than I can say." "You don't owe me anything," he replied, leaning against the bulkhead. "But I need to know how we can help you further. That data you stole, who exactly did you plan to give it to?" Her shoulders tensed. "I had a contact. Someone high in the Celax's resistance movement, an underground network dedicated to freeing Zari prisoners used for illegal experimentation. I was supposed to meet them on a place called Sarik's Rest." Adrian mulled it over. Sarik's Rest was a lawless outpost near the Galactic Rim, notorious for smugglers, pirates, and the occasional whistleblower exchange. What do they plan to do with the data? "Present it to a coalition of planetary governments," Selene said. "If the proof is strong enough, it could spark an investigation or even a crackdown on those labs. I don't pretend it'll be easy, but it's the best chance we have to save others." Adrian exhaled. He had planned to lay low, find a quiet job, maybe retire from the galaxy's storms. But the prospect of letting a vile conspiracy continue while he stood aside, he couldn't stomach that. "Then we'll go to Sarik's Rest," he decided. "Find this contact of yours, deliver the data." Selene's eyes glimmered with unshed tears. "You'd do that for us?" He gave a slight shrug. "I'm already in this deep. Besides, I can't stand by while good people suffer. I've seen too much of that in the wars." He paused, studying her. We'll need to keep a low profile. Mercenaries are definitely on our tail. She nodded, weariness overshadowing relief. Yes, they'll be relentless. Adrian crouched beside the bunk, resting a hand gently on Elara's shoulder. She stirred, then blinked awake. Are we safe? She asked, voice trembling. For now, Adrian assured her. We're hiding among the asteroids. Next stop is Sarek's Rest, if that's all right with you. Elara looked to her mother, who nodded. Okay, she murmured, though fear still lingered in her luminous eyes. Adrian rose and dimmed the lights, letting mother and daughter rest. With a burdened sigh, he returned to the cockpit. The path ahead was fraught with peril, but his decision felt strangely right. He punched in the coordinates for Sarek's Rest. As the hyperdrive spooled up, a swirl of cosmic light enveloped the Hawk, pulling them into the shimmering corridor of faster-than-light travel. They were bound for a refuge that might barely deserve the name, pursued by an unseen enemy that would stop at nothing to reclaim the stolen secrets. And somewhere, in the silent spaces between stars, Adrian felt the pull of destiny. 4 days passed as the sidereal Hawk navigated the labyrinth of jump gates and drifting cosmic dust. During that time, Selene grew stronger, though she remained frail. Elara scarcely left her mother's side, helping administer the portable nutrient supply. Adrian wondered if the child would ever shake off the trauma of nearly losing her mother in that spaceport. As they approached Sarek's Rest, Adrian explained the station's nature. It's an old mining platform, abandoned when the ore ran dry. Outlaws moved in, turned it into a black market hub. Security's minimal, so we won't be scanning in under official channels. He studied Selene's expression. She seemed uneasy but resolute. My contact is named Adrian Vale, she said. He told me to meet him in a place called the Spiral's Edge, a tavern on the station. If he's there, we can arrange a handoff. And if he's not? Adrian asked, guiding the Hawk through final approach. The outpost loomed in the distance, a ragged construct of metal scaffolds and battered docking modules. Selene swallowed. Then, I don't know. We'll figure something out. Adrian cast her a reassuring glance. We will. They docked in a small, ill-maintained bay. The airlocks squealed in protest, as if the entire station threatened to collapse at any moment. A rancid stench of stale oxygen and unwashed metal greeted them. Adrian led the way, scanning with a handheld device to ensure no immediate ambush waited. Elara wrinkled her nose at the station's dank corridors, but she held Selene's hand firmly. I'll be brave, she whispered, more for her own sake than anyone else's. The route to the Spiral's Edge tavern wound through labyrinthine passageways. Flickering neon signs advertised questionable services. Ragged figures, some wearing patchwork armor, lurked in corners. Occasionally, a synth beat hammered from behind closed doors. This was a place where the law held little sway. Finally, they arrived at the Spiral's Edge. The door slid open with a hiss of compressed air, revealing a dim bar filled with smoke and low chatter. Alien patrons hunched over battered tables, exchanging hushed words. A cracked holoscreen in the corner looped advertisement reels for exotic body mods. They slipped inside, drawing curious stares. Adrian's soldier's gait and Selene's bioluminescent skin were unusual sights, even in a place like this. Leaning against a metal railing, an insectoid bartender clicked its mandibles in greeting or perhaps warning. Welcome, it rasped. Selene scanned the patrons, searching for her contact. Adrian kept a protective stance beside her. He's not here, she whispered, an edge of panic creeping into her tone. Adrian said he'd wait for me. Elara peered around nervously, eyes wide at the seedy environment. Adrian placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Let's take a table, keep our heads down. We'll watch for him. They settled at a secluded corner booth. Selene's eyes moved restlessly over the throng of patrons. Time crawled. Each passing moment gnawed at Adrian's nerves. If Adrian didn't show, how else could they get the data out? At last, a figure entered, wearing a hooded cloak. He paused in the doorway, scanning the room. When his gaze fell upon Selene, he hurried over with urgent steps. Selene, he breathed, pulling back his hood to reveal a pale, angular face. An Elorian, by the look of his elongated ears. You made it. Adrian, Selene replied, relief flooding her voice. They stood, exchanging a brief embrace. I was worried you. He waved away her concern. Security's tighter than expected here, but I made it. Have you got the data? Selene nodded, tapping the thin medallion at her neck. Encrypted and stored here. It carries all the evidence. Good. Ariane's gaze flicked to Adrian, then to Elara. He lowered his voice, adopting a more formal tone. Introductions? Selene gestured. This is Adrian Vale, the human who saved our lives on Noveria. Then, quieter, we owe him everything. Ariane inclined his head, though suspicion glimmered in his dark eyes. A friend, then. Let's sit and finalize this. They huddled around the booth once more. Selene removed the medallion, pressing hidden sensors that triggered a faint glow. Ariane produced a small device, plugging the medallion in through a series of adapters. Streams of data scrolled across a tiny hollow display. So it's true, Ariane murmured, eyes wide. They've taken hundreds of Zari, performed experiments with psionic amplification, gene splicing. This is monstrous. Selene's voice trembled. Worse than you know. They're close to weaponizing the Zari neural pathways to create super soldiers with empathic or telekinetic powers. It could change warfare forever. Ariane's face hardened. We'll see it exposed. I have friends in the Alliance, some with official clout. Once this goes public, these labs will have nowhere to hide. Adrian allowed himself a glimmer of hope. Maybe this is it. Maybe they'll be safe. Then his soldier's intuition prickled. He glanced around. Two armed figures at the bar had risen from their stools, eyes fixed on their table. Ariane noticed them, too. Trouble, he whispered. Adrian nodded. We need to move. There could be more. Without warning, the bar's main door slammed open, flooding the smoke-filled room with harsh light. A squad of mercenaries, different from the pair at Noveria, but similarly menacing, strode in, weapons ready. Their leader, a tall, gaunt woman with a metal visor, scanned the crowd. She pointed at Selene. Hand over the data now, Zari, or your daughter dies first. A hush fell over the tavern. Patrons froze or shrank back into shadow, unwilling to get involved. Elara let out a small whimper, and Selene pulled her protectively close. Adrian rose, teeth clenched. Back off. The gaunt woman sneered. I know who you are, soldier boy. Killed 2 of my colleagues on Noveria. My employer wants you alive if possible, but I'm happy to settle for a corpse. She signaled her troops, who fanned out. Ariane slipped the medallion back into Selene's hand. Take it. I'll try to run interference, he murmured, switching off the hollow display. What are you? Selene began, but he'd already slid from the booth, raising his hands as if to surrender. Don't shoot. I'm unarmed, Ariane called, stepping between the mercenaries and Selene. The leader eyed him contemptuously. Out of my way. But Ariane flicked a button on his wrist device. The overhead lights blew out in a shower of sparks, plunging the spiral's edge into darkness. At the same instant, strobing bursts of a sonic pulse erupted from hidden speakers, disorienting friend and foe alike. Adrian's ears rang, but he'd experienced worse in combat. He grabbed Selene's wrist, pulled Elara close, and surged toward the exit in the confusion. Shots rang out in the dark. Stray plasma bolts flared across the tavern, illuminating glimpses of huddled patrons, overturned tables, and shattered bottles. Ariane's decoy had bought them precious seconds, but the mercenaries recovered quickly, their visor tech likely giving them an edge in low light. Still gripping his pistol, Adrian fired a warning shot at the silhouette of a mercenary who lunged toward them. The man dove behind a table, cursing. Elara squeaked in fright, clinging to her mother's side. They slipped past the bar, the insectoid bartender skittering aside. At the exit, Ariane materialized from the haze, panting. Go? I have a ship waiting in Dock C. We can. A plasma bolt slammed into his chest mid-sentence, cutting him off. He collapsed, eyes wide in shock. Selene let out a cry, dropping to her knees. Ariane. He clutched her hand, blood seeping through his cloak. The data, he gasped. You must get it too. His words trailed off, eyes glazing. Selene's face contorted in anguish. No, no, Adrian grimaced, hauling her to her feet. We can't help him now, he said, hating the cruel pragmatism of it. We have to go, or they'll kill us all. Tears streaming, Selene let Elara pull her away. The mercenaries advanced, brandishing rifles fitted with flashlights that cut glaring beams through the smoky darkness. Adrian gritted his teeth, turned, and fired 2 more shots, forcing the attackers to duck. Then he bolted, half-dragging Selene and Elara out of the spiral's edge and into the corridor beyond. The station's flickering lights offered little sanctuary, but at least it was less chaotic than the bar. They sprinted down a winding passage, ignoring the startled cries of passers-by. Selene's breathing was labored, but she pushed on, clutching Elara's hand and the precious data medallion. Adrian's mind raced. Arion had a ship in Dock C, he thought, but the mercenaries would expect them to head there. The sidereal hawk was a few levels away. Returning there might be our only chance. As if reading his thoughts, Selene panted, "We can't risk the mercenaries. They'll have the docking bays covered." He nodded grimly. "We'll find another route. This way." Yet the station was a deadly maze of corridors and side passages. At every turn, Adrian expected to meet more armed pursuers. They turned a corner, passing a sign that read Maintenance, Shaft 3A. Adrian froze. This might lead us around the main docking corridor. Elara looked uncertain, but Selene gave a shaky nod. With time running out, Adrian yanked open the heavy metal hatch and ushered them inside. They descended into darkness, the smell of mildew and corroded wiring assaulting their senses. Behind them, echoes of shouting and footfalls grew. The mercenaries were not far behind. Adrian flicked on a small flashlight, illuminating a narrow crawlway lined with pipes. "We have to hurry." He led the way, stepping carefully over puddles of rancid liquid that dripped from overhead conduits. A few minutes later, they emerged into an abandoned cargo hold. The air was thick with dust. Rusted crates sat stacked in precarious towers. Adrian recognized the layout from similar stations he'd visited in the past. With luck, they could slip through the cargo hold's far exit, then circle around to the Hawk. But as they made their way through the gloom, two mercenaries appeared in the hold's entrance, silhouetted by the corridor's hazy light. "There they are," one shouted. "Down!" Adrian shouted, pushing Selene and Elara behind a crate. Bolt after bolt of searing plasma rained past, setting old storage containers ablaze. Thick smoke curled upwards. Selene gasped, pressing Elara to the floor. She winced, a hand going to her temple. Her luminescent skin began to glow more brightly, throbbing in sync with her ragged heartbeat. Adrian realized she was on the verge of something, a phenomenon he'd only heard rumor of: Zari psionic surges, triggered by intense emotion or danger. A roar from the other side of the hold indicated more mercenaries entering. They were pinned. Adrian reloaded, about to make a desperate stand, when Selene let out a ragged cry. Her eyes snapped open, blazing with azure light. The air around her shimmered, as if charged with static electricity. Then it happened. A concussive wave of psionic energy erupted from Selene, rippling outward in a dome. The crates rattled violently, toppling in a cacophony of metal. The mercenaries were hurled back as if struck by a massive invisible hand. Their screams were drowned by the roar of the collapsing cargo towers. When the wave subsided, the cargo hold was left in disarray. Smoke, dust, and the faint crackle of sparks filled the air. Adrian coughed, helping Elara to her feet. Selene slumped forward, that brilliant glow fading as exhaustion overtook her. "Mama!" Elara cried, catching her. Selene was still breathing, but barely conscious. Adrian eyed the battered mercenaries across the hold. Some lay unconscious beneath twisted beams and crates. Others moaned weakly, pinned by debris. "We need to go," he said, voice hoarse from dust and smoke. Gathering their strength, they scrambled through the wreckage and out of the cargo hold, leaving the mercenaries behind. Selene stumbled, leaning heavily on Adrian's arm, while Elara remained close. A single thought echoed in Adrian's mind as they fled: "She's more powerful and more vulnerable than I realized." The Zari psionic surge had saved them, but it also revealed why her captors wanted her so desperately. They would never stop hunting her now. By the time they reached the Sidereal Hawk's docking bay, the station's alarms were wailing. More squads of mercenaries likely patrolled the corridors. Adrian's chest ached with each breath, but he couldn't stop. He accessed the ship's ramp, half carrying Selene aboard. Elara stumbled alongside, face streaked with sweat and tears. "Mama, stay awake," she begged, voice high with fear. Once inside the small medical alcove near the bunk, Adrian set Selene down gently, checking her pulse. It fluttered weakly, her skin flickering in faint, erratic pulses of light. Her face was pale, luminescence dimming. She's in bad shape, he muttered. That psionic outburst drained her. Elara hovered, tears in her luminous eyes. Will she be okay? Adrian swallowed. I don't know. He rummaged through the medical kit, finding a broad-spectrum stimulant. It was risky, especially for a Zari, but better than letting her slip away. Carefully, he administered a low dose. Selene moaned, eyelids flickering. A hail of gunfire on the hull forced him to act. He raced to the cockpit, shouting back to Elara. Stay with her. Strap in if you can. Elara nodded, eyes full of worry but also determination. She placed her small hand on her mother's cheek. I'm here, Mama. At the controls, Adrian powered the engines. Outside the viewport, a cluster of mercenaries took aim, firing bursts that spanged off the hull. Once again, the sidereal hawk rattled under fire. He cursed, lifting off from the docking clamps. A particularly well-placed shot blew out the station's overhead lights, plunging the entire dock into darkness save for emergency strobes. With a deft maneuver, Adrian turned the ship, firing a couple of warning shots from the Hawk's forward cannons. The mercenaries scattered. He seized the moment to launch out of the bay, weaving through the station's external architecture. The outpost's minimal defenses were no match for his immediate breakout. As they cleared the docking ring, Sarek's rest receded into the star-flecked darkness behind them. Adrian locked the NAV system onto the next coordinates in mind, somewhere safe, or at least safer than here. He wanted a rendezvous with legitimate officials, but how could they trust anyone after what they'd seen? Back in the medical alcove, Selene's breathing steadied slightly under the stimulant, though she was still perilously weak. Elara curled at her side, tears silently tracking down her cheeks. Adrian entered, knelt beside them. Selene, he said, voice soft. We're out. We escaped. She blinked at him, as though from a great distance. Arion, she rasped. Adrian shook his head. He's gone. I'm sorry. A tremor ran through her, tears slipping from the corners of her eyes. Elara clung to her mother's hand, tears of her own brightening her cheeks. For a moment, they grieved and shared silence. Then Selene drew a shuddering breath. He wanted us to succeed, she said haltingly. We have to. Adrian gave a firm nod. We will. I'm charting a course for, he hesitated. I know a contact, an old friend in the Frontier Alliance who might be able to help. It's a risk, but it's the best I can offer. Selene managed a faint smile. We trust you. Elara's eyes flicked up, swirling with emotion. Thank you, Adrian, she whispered. You're the only one who cares. The weight of their trust settled on him like a mantle. Once, he had been a soldier fighting for nebulous causes, growing disillusioned with each campaign. Now, he fought for two lives that depended on him, and, in a broader sense, for the countless Zari victims hidden away in brutal labs. I won't let you down, he promised, gripping Selene's hand. A subtle tingle coursed through him at the touch of her luminescent skin, as though a faint residue of her psionic energy resonated with his own heartbeat. They were bound together now, by fate as much as circumstance. In that moment, Adrian felt a profound shift within himself, as though the cynicism that once shielded him was dissolving in the face of an unyielding need to protect and nurture. Perhaps that was the essence of humanity he'd lost in the wars, now rediscovered in the plight of an alien woman and her daughter. He returned to the cockpit. The ship coasted through hyperspace, the swirling tunnel of light reminiscent of a cosmic dream. Danger still loomed, but hope flickered in the darkness, a new star waiting to be kindled. Adrian Vale, ex-soldier, found himself at the helm of not just a ship, but of a cause worth fighting for. Days slipped by in the hush of the hyperlane. Selene hovered between fragile health and deep exhaustion, drifting in and out of sleep. Adrian coaxed her to eat when she was lucid, administering mild stimulants and pain relievers from the ship's meager supplies. Elara proved a loyal companion, rarely leaving her mother's side except when Adrian insisted she rest. One morning, or what passed for morning aboard a starship, Elara ventured to the cockpit. She stood there a moment, watching Adrian fiddle with the NAV controls. Is it true you were a soldier? She asked quietly. Adrian glanced at her. That's right. I served in the Frontier Wars. Elara nodded, hugging herself. Did you see bad things? He studied the child's solemn face. Yes, he admitted after a pause. War shows people at their worst. But sometimes it shows people at their best, too. She seemed to mull that over. I think you're one of the best, she said softly. I sincere. Adrian's throat tightened. I'm just doing what's right, he managed, patting the seat beside him. Want to learn how to monitor the comm system? A faint, hopeful spark lit her eyes. She climbed up, focusing on the console as Adrian explained how to read the blinking indicators and signal bandwidths. She asked small questions, her curiosity a fragile bud after so much fear. In teaching her, Adrian felt something in himself mend, as though tending to the child's wonder might heal old wounds left by war. Soon, the proximity alarms chimed, signaling they were nearing the coordinates he'd set, a remote outpost near the Frontier Alliance's territory. Once a small diplomatic station, it had been repurposed for sporadic trade. Adrian's friend, an Alliance officer named Captain Rena Morgan, sometimes docked there to resupply and handle covert missions. He explained to Selene his plan. If Captain Morgan is here, we can pass the data to her. She has a reputation for integrity and enough clout to push for an investigation. Selene, still pale, nodded. I'll trust your friend if you do. Thus, the sidereal hawk slipped from hyperspace, approaching a lonely station orbiting a barren planet. The station's lights glowed faintly, a signal in the cosmic sea. Adrian pinged for docking clearance, using an old code from his military days. An automated voice responded, granting them permission. Adrian breathed a sigh of relief. At least they haven't blacklisted me yet. Carefully, he docked the ship, instructing Selene and Elara to wait until he ensured it was safe. The docking module hissed open, revealing a modest corridor in better repair than Sarek's rest, but far from luxurious. A single guard waited, wearing the Alliance's insignia. Adrian approached, pulling down the hood of his jacket. I'm here to see Captain Morgan. The guard, suspicious, tapped his comm seconds later. A calm female voice answered, let him through. Adrian motioned for Selene and Elara to follow. They emerged together, earning a raised eyebrow from the guard at the sight of the bioluminescent Zari. But no alarm was raised. The guard simply escorted them through a series of corridors to a secure briefing room. Inside, a tall woman with iron-gray hair stood waiting Captain Rena Morgan. Vale, she said, arms crossed. I heard rumors you were dead or gone, privateer. He managed a half-smile. I'm still around. Been busy. She sized him up, then extended a hand. Adrian shook it firmly. Turning her attention to Selene and Elara, Morgan softened her tone. Friends of yours? Adrian nodded. They need help. And they carry important intel, evidence of illegal experiments on the Zari people. I'm hoping you'll pass it up the chain. Morgan's gaze flicked over Selene, noting her weakened state. If this is as serious as you say, we'll do what we can. She gestured to a seat. Tell me everything. Selene, though visibly trembling, mustered her courage. She explained how she was abducted, how the labs operated, the horrors she witnessed. Elara chipped in, voice tight with remembered fear. Adrian added details of the mercenary pursuits and Arion's sacrifice. Morgan listened intently, her expression darkening. When Selene finished, she said grimly, I'll get this data to my superiors. These crimes won't go unanswered. But I'd be lying if I said it would be easy. You're dealing with powerful interests. They'll try to bury this if they can. Selene's eyes sparkled. We must try. People are still suffering. Morgan inclined her head. The Alliance stands for justice, at least the official line. I'll do what I can to hold them to it. She paused, considering. In the meantime, you and your daughter need a safe place. If you stay with me, the Alliance can grant you temporary protection. Adrian felt a surge of relief. This was the best chance they had. Then he noticed Selene's face fall, her eyes darting to him. What about Adrian? She asked, voice trembling. He's done so much for us. Morgan's expression turned serious. Vale, you're an ex-soldier gone freelance. You shot up half of Novaria's security detail. It won't look good. But I can try to get you cleared if you testify, help us build a strong case. Adrian's heart pounded. He pictured himself caught in endless tribunals, hammered by questions about his past, forced to justify actions that had been morally driven but legally questionable. Yet, if that's what it takes. But before he could speak, Selene took his hand. We wouldn't have survived without you, she whispered. Please, stay with us. He looked at her, then at Elara, who clung to her mother's side. The idea of leaving them now felt like betrayal. Clearing his throat, he answered quietly, I'll do it. Whatever it takes to bring this to light. Morgan gave a curt nod. Good. Then let's finalize arrangements. I'll have medical staff look at Selene. We'll keep you under protective detail while I forward the data to Alliance intelligence. Adrian tightened his hand around Selene's, relief battling with apprehension. They were no longer adrift. but entering a new fight, this time in the courts, in the realm of politics and public exposure. It wasn't the gunfight he knew, but it was no less dangerous. Over the ensuing weeks, the station's small medical facility treated Selene's injuries. Her Zari physiology complicated matters, but the staff worked diligently, stabilizing her psionic surges with advanced neural dampeners. Bit by bit, her strength returned. Elara, reassured by her mother's improving health, blossomed into a curious child once more, exploring the station's safer corridors under careful supervision. For Adrian, the days blurred with debriefings and official statements. Captain Morgan orchestrated transmissions of the stolen data to high-ranking Alliance officials. The reaction was explosive. Investigations were launched, subcommittees convened. Whispers of powerful corporate backers, even some rogue factions within the Alliance itself, swirled. Then one day, Morgan delivered grave news. We've confirmed the existence of multiple facilities holding Zari captives. But the Alliance Council is hesitant to intervene directly. Too many political entanglements. They want more evidence, more time. She spat the words like they tasted bitter. Selene's knuckles whitened. More time, she repeated. While my people suffer. Morgan looked pained. We're pushing for a resolution, but it could be months or years. Adrian stood, pacing. That's not acceptable. We have the data. We have living proof. What more do they need? Morgan shook her head. Bureaucracy moves slowly. Some are stalling, no doubt compromised by the corporations behind these experiments. It's sickening, but that's politics. Elara's eyes shimmered with tears. Then, how will we help them? Silence fell. Adrian's jaw tightened. He hated the feeling of helplessness, the memory of all those times in the war when orders contradicted moral imperatives. This is the same old story, just with new characters. Selene gently gripped his arm. We have to do something. Morgan let out a resigned sigh. There may be another way. A direct approach. Some within the Alliance are planning an unsanctioned raid on the largest facility. If we can liberate the captives and record undeniable evidence, the Council will be forced to act. But it's risky, borderline illegal. If it fails, or if word leaks, it'll be pinned on rogue elements. You, me, everyone involved could become outlaws. Selene gazed at Elara, then looked at Morgan with steeled resolve. If that's what it takes to free my people. I agree. Adrian felt a chill run down his spine. He pictured the battles to come, the potential cost. Then he thought of the Zari children imprisoned in labs, never knowing a day of freedom. Count me in, he said, his voice firm. Morgan nodded. I expected no less from you too. Let's prepare. Thus, a clandestine alliance formed, drawing together a handful of outraged officers and volunteers. They would strike one of the key labs, rescue the Zari captives, and broadcast live footage of the atrocities, forcing the hand of the waffling council. It was a plan born of desperation and righteous fury. The plan was set in motion swiftly. Under the pretense of a routine patrol, Captain Morgan's ship, an Alliance frigate with a dedicated infiltration squad, departed the station, accompanied by the Sidereal Hawk. Selene and Elara stayed with Adrian, determined to see the mission through, though Elara's role was strictly that of an observer. Selene insisted she wouldn't be parted from her daughter again. The target, a covert research outpost hidden on a moon of the gas giant, Velitas Prime. According to the stolen data, the outpost housed dozens of Zari subjects. The aim: disable security, free the captives, gather irrefutable evidence, and transmit it in real time to the Alliance network. Adrian's hands trembled with adrenaline as he piloted the Hawk into the moon's orbit. The infiltration squad, led by Morgan, would handle the ground assault. Adrian's role was to provide air support and assist with evac. Selene, though still weakened, insisted on joining the infiltration. She knew the facility's layout and might be able to navigate the group to the captives. In the Hawk's cabin, Elara hugged her mother. Be careful, she whispered, luminous tears welling. Selene cupped her daughter's face. I'll return to you, my star. Promise. She looked at Adrian. Keep her safe. He nodded gravely, guiding Elara toward the co-pilot's seat. We'll be circling above. I'll be in constant contact. Selene bit her lip, offering him a thankful look. Then she stepped onto the frigate's shuttle platform, joining Morgan's infiltration team. As dawn broke over the moon's frosty horizon, the mission began. Adrian hovered the Sidereal Hawk just beyond the facility's sensor range, scanning for threats. He kept an open comm link with Morgan. Her voice crackled. We're in. Selene's leading us through a maintenance hatch. Moments later, sporadic gunfire and startled shouts echoed through the channel. Adrian's throat tightened. He pictured Selene in the midst of it, risking everything to save her people. Elara's anxious gaze darted to him, and he forced a reassuring nod. "They'll be fine," he said quietly, though dread coiled in his gut. The infiltration progressed. Morgan reported disabling perimeter defenses. They located a lab complex filled with holding cells. Disturbing transmissions hinted at tortured Zari captives. Selene's anguished cry carried over the comm, fueling Adrian's resolve. Then came an urgent shout. "We're under heavy fire." They had a second security squad. "Need backup now." Adrian sprang into action, scanning the horizon for any outgoing defense drones or gunships. Sure enough, a cluster of them launched from a hidden hangar, speeding toward Morgan's location. "Hang on," Adrian snarled, gripping the flight stick. "Elara, strap in." She complied, knuckles white, tears brimming. The Hawk rocketed toward the facility. Automated turrets locked on, sending flares of plasma into the sky. Adrian jinked and dodged, returning fire with the ship's cannons. Explosions lit the horizon as the defense drones fell, one by one. Then, homing in on Morgan's transponder, he hovered low above the lab's courtyard. Below, troopers exchanged fierce fire with a wave of black-clad security forces. Selene was barely visible, kneeling beside a console, apparently hacking the cell doors. Blue arcs of psionic sparks crackled along her arms, as though her body was on the brink of another surge. Adrian engaged the ship's landing thrusters. "Stay here," he told Elara sternly, though her eyes pleaded with him to do otherwise. "I'll bring your mother back." Her nod was small, terrified but trusting. He grabbed a rifle from the ship's locker and descended the ramp. The courtyard was thick with acrid smoke, swirling around burning vehicles. Morgan's squad had pinned down the defenders, but they were outnumbered. Adrian sprinted into cover behind a fallen crate, scanning for Selene. He found her by the console, breathing hard, eyes glowing with that eerie Zari light. A guard lunged at her with a stun prod. Adrian squeezed the rifle's trigger, dropping the guard just in time. Selene met his gaze, relief flooding her face. Holding cells open, she gasped, voice raw. "We need to get them out." Adrian nodded. "Morgan," he yelled over the din, "cover us. We're getting the prisoners to the shuttle." "Copy that," came her reply. With a grunt, Adrian helped Selene to her feet. Together they hurried into the labyrinthine hall leading to the holding cells. The walls were sterile white, now scorched with laser marks. Doors slid open to reveal cramped, dim cells, each containing a Zari captive, chained and malnourished. Some had glowing eyes filled with terror, others lay motionless, barely alive. Selene knelt beside the nearest occupant, unfastening shackles with shaking hands. Adrian covered her, gunning down two more guards who came charging down the corridor. "Go," he urged, motioning the freed Zari to move toward the exit. "The path is clear for now." One by one, the prisoners emerged. A few had the strength to walk. Others needed to be carried. Selene's luminous tears rolled down her cheeks as she witnessed the extent of the cruelty inflicted on her people. Adrian, heart hammering, guided them back to the courtyard, where Morgan's troopers were securing an area for evacuation. But the reprieve was short-lived. A klaxon blared, signaling a last-ditch security measure. Automated turrets popped from the walls, spraying lethal bolts across the courtyard. Zari captives screamed and dived for cover. Morgan's squad took heavy fire. Selene collapsed against Adrian, her energy nearly spent. He raised his rifle, peppering the turrets with blasts. Morgan lobbed grenades that disabled several. But the onslaught was unrelenting. Adrian's mind raced. If they're pinned down, we might never get the prisoners out. Suddenly, amid the chaos, Selene let out a guttural cry. Blue light flared around her, intensifying until it formed a swirling vortex of psionic force. Adrian grabbed her arm, alarmed. "Selene, no, you'll kill yourself." Her eyes shone, tears streaming. "I have to," she shouted over the din. "Go, take them." Before Adrian could stop her, she strode into the open, arms extended. The turrets targeted her, firing sizzling bolts. Yet each bolt distorted before reaching her, as if bending around a protective sphere. She unleashed a psionic wave so powerful that the ground trembled. The turrets shattered, sparks cascading like fiery rain. Guards were flung like rag dolls, unconscious or worse. The courtyard fell silent, save for the crackle of flames. Selene swayed, then collapsed to her knees. Adrian rushed to her, catching her before she hit the ground. Her glow was almost extinguished, breathing shallow. "No, no, stay with me," he begged, voice shaking. She opened her eyes, no more than a faint glimmer. "Take them home," she whispered, her hand falling limp at her side. A stab of anguish tore at Adrian's heart. He cradled her, ignoring the urgent shouts around him. "Morgan, we need a medic," he bellowed. Morgan ran over, quickly assessing Selene's condition with a portable scanner. "She's still alive," she said, relief warring with concern. "But we need to evacuate now." In the aftermath, the infiltration team shepherded the liberated Zari onto the Alliance frigate and the Sidereal Hawk. Many were in dire need of medical attention. Adrian carried Selene aboard his ship, where Elara rushed to her mother's side in hysterical tears. Together, they laid her on the bunk, hooking her to every supportive device the medkit offered. Soberly, Morgan's ship transmitted the live footage of the facility's atrocities across Alliance networks. Within hours, public outrage soared. The Council convened an emergency session, condemning the horrors. Under immense pressure, they authorized a full-scale investigation. Raids were launched on other suspected sites. The unstoppable wheels of justice finally began to turn. Yet, at Selene's bedside, the cost was personal and immediate. She remained unconscious, her body taxed by a final, immense psionic outburst. Medical scans suggested her neural pathways had been severely overstrained, possibly irreversibly. For days, they traveled back to the Alliance station, the newly freed Zari receiving care. Elara stayed beside her mother constantly, dozing fitfully, waking to stroke Selene's hand. Adrian hovered near, consumed by worry. She saved them all. But will she wake up? When they arrived at the station, advanced medtech specialists took Selene into an intensive care unit. Hours turned into days, each passing moment eroding hope. Elara often looked to Adrian for reassurance. He wished he could promise a miracle. But life in the galaxy had taught him that miracles were rare. If the story ends on a happy note. Then, one morning, a soft chime alerted Adrian that Selene's vitals had stabilized. He and Elara rushed into the medbay. There, among the gentle glow of monitors, Selene's eyes fluttered open. A subdued radiance traced along her skin. "Mama!" Elara cried, tears of joy spilling over. She grasped Selene's hand, pressing it to her cheek. Selene's voice was faint but warm. "My star, I'm here." Adrian felt a surge of relief so profound he nearly staggered. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You did it," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "They're free. Your people, they're free." She turned her head, eyes moist with gratitude. "And you saved me," she murmured, reaching for his hand. In the months that followed, the Alliance's expose of the labs sent ripples across the galaxy. Corporate moguls behind the experiments were arrested. Humanitarian groups flocked to help the freed Zari rebuild their lives. And for Selene, a new chapter began. She gradually regained her strength. Elara's laughter once more filled their days, a testament to resilience. As for Adrian, he found a renewed purpose, traveling alongside Selene and Elara, assisting with relief efforts, ensuring that no new threat rose to exploit the vulnerable again. No longer a disillusioned soldier, he had discovered in the bond with this alien mother and her child a cause that resonated with the deepest part of his being. And so it was that they journeyed across the stars, not as fugitives, but as heralds of hope, forging a future where compassion prevailed over cruelty. The memory of all they endured would forever bind them. 3 lives woven together by fate, and by a single moment of kindness in the bustling port of Noveria. The happy ending. If the story ends on a sad note. Then, one evening, after days of clinging to hope, Selene's heart monitor flatlined. Elara was at her bedside, holding her mother's hand. Adrian heard the frantic alarms, rushed in, only to see the medical staff solemnly shaking their heads. "Mama!" Elara's small voice quivered, tears cascading down her glowing cheeks. But Selene's luminescent skin faded, her eyes closing for the last time. The psionic strain had been too great. A hush fell over the medbay. Adrian stood rooted in grief, arms limp at his sides. Elara collapsed into his embrace, her sobs echoing in the sterile room. He held her tight, tears burning his own eyes. Selene had given everything, her life for her people's freedom. In the aftermath, the public outrage still forced the Alliance's hand. The rescued Zari were given care, and the villains behind the labs were tried. Justice, of a sort, was served. Yet for Elara, the price was immeasurable. Adrian, not knowing what else to do, took the child under his wing. They left the station quietly, the sidereal hawk becoming a bittersweet home for both of them. He taught Elara the ways of the stars, how to navigate jump gates, how to fix a jammed thruster. And each night, when sorrow loomed, he held her hand, reminding her of the mother who had loved her beyond measure. Sometimes, in the silence of space, Adrian would sense a faint warmth near the pilot's seat, as though Selene's spirit lingered, guiding them toward distant horizons. In that gentle glow, he found a measure of comfort, resolved to honor her memory by caring for Elara and ensuring no other Zari would face such horrors again. Life pressed on, subdued yet determined, a promise kept to the woman who gave all for hope. In the quiet hum of the ship's engines, the echo of Selene's sacrifice lingered, a haunting reminder that even in victory, the cost of saving others can sometimes be the greatest loss of all.